All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for your patience through those who are here in Ghana and those who are online. For my presentation, I will be dealing with knowledge production and its associated cottage industries. And my name is Dr. Obadele Kambon. I'm representing the Institute of African Studies, as well as ASAA, African Studies Association of Africa, as its interim executive secretary. So this is an abstract. I won't go through this, but some of you saw that in the email that went out. So for the structure of the presentation, we'll be looking at the effects of divestment on apartheid-era Umzansi. For those who may not know, Umzansi is the indigenous word for South Africa. And then also we'll look at a case for divestment from the United States, and then look at avenues for divestment, knowledge production, and associated cottage industries. And then some of those cottage industries include publishing, conferences, meetings, and events, and then also employment. And we're looking at divestment from the United States and investing in Africa via knowledge production. Now, for those of you who are old enough to remember growing up in the 80s, I can see a few of you who do or were already grown by the time of the 80s. You'll remember some of these buttons, you'll remember some of these images. And I grew up in a family that was very much sensitive to issues of divestment from apartheid-era South Africa. So there were certain petrol stations that we would never go to. There were certain brands that we would never buy, and all of that was in solidarity with the Africans there in Umzansi. And some of those brands, for those who may not remember, Coca-Cola, of course we wouldn't use that anyway unless we were cleaning our toilet bowl, but we didn't even decide to use it for that. Shell, to this day I've never ever bought Shell, Del Monte, so forth and so on. Barclays, which is here in Ghana. Now there was some backlash from that, where whites were saying, oh, well, if you shoot it in the white, then the black dies with it. In other words, the things that you're doing targeting whites is really going to trickle down and hurt black people, so don't do any sanctions. Of course, that is some of the blighted logic that really does not hold any type of water, because the African people were dying anyway, left, right, front, and center. So these were some of the things, and now in retrospect, we can definitely see that some of these sanctions actually did work. Now, part of that we saw from the US, in particular, the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act of 1986. This is after the Sullivan Principles in 1977. Now, there were all of these steamroll effects where in 85 and 86, the US government passed legislation imposing trade embargoes, currency sanctions, and lending restrictions as well, specifically prohibiting the import of South African uranium, coal, textiles, and so forth and so on. Now, for these things, what you actually see, oh, I should be looking in this direction. Okay, no problem, I can definitely do that. So also, airlines were not allowed, South African airlines were not allowed to fly in or land into various countries. And white South Africans got the cold shoulder in places that they would go to, and all of this was part of the same thing. So by 1988, 155 universities had divested from South Africa. In 1986, the University of California divested, selling $3.1 billion worth of stock. General Motors sold its plant in 86, IBM left in 87, Sara Lee, Borg Warner, and so forth and so on. And I have some of these links as easy links. You can make this an interactive session if you have internet. Very easy, goo.gl, and then you can verify some of this information there as well. There was also what was known as capital flight. So net capital movement out of South Africa was 9.2 billion rand in 85, 6.1 billion in 86, 3.1 in 87, 5.5 in 1988. So this was, a lot of outflow of capital. People were saying they didn't want to invest, and a lot of the grassroots solutions were there for that. Now, we don't want it to seem as though apartheid was the actual problem in and of itself. That was a symptom of the problem. And this is what we see time and time again, where despite the fact they've stolen the land of African people, despite the fact that they have stolen the diamonds, uranium, they say the problem is apartheid, that you're not close to us. It's like, no, that's not actually the problem. You're trying to solve a symptom. So there's a quote from Dead Press to this effect. They say, They manufacture disease, create sickness, then they rent you a cure for the symptoms. To them, it's just business. This is what we see, that apartheid was a symptom of the overall problem, but that in and of itself was not the problem. So what they misidentify symptoms as the problem while avoiding the root problem or cause. Then they publicize the problem and then offer a solution for the symptoms only. Now let's make this a little bit more interactive. When I say divest from America, I want you to say invest in Africa. Divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
Divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
That's how I know that you are here. And those of you who are online can say the same thing as well. And Malcolm X warned us of this problem of, trying to present the symptom as a problem, where he said, desegregated public toilet, you can sit down next to white folks on the toilet. That's no revolution. And we see the same thing tried over and over again across different continents. So in the US, they say, oh, the problem is integration. You need to be integrated with us. No, that's not the problem. In South Africa, they say, oh, it's apartheid. You're apart from us. That's the problem. Same thing in India. They say, oh, it's untouchability. We'll allow you into the temples. We'll allow you to drink the water. None of those are the problem, but they're very clear that none of those are the problem. But they make the symptoms so painful that once you're able to at least get rid of the symptoms, you act like, okay, it's done. But that's the whole point, is to make you think, all right, now just sit down. The struggle is done. Now here in the US, for those who are there in the US, Black Lives Matter movement is going on. So African black people are being shot down in the streets daily. And this is what we see. This is Laquan McDonald.
Tonight, this newly released dash cam video shows the chilling moment when Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke unloads his gun on 17-year-old Laquan McDonald. We will freeze the video here. McDonald.
Right? So this is what we see going on daily. We happen to see caught on camera, but this happens daily during the Obama era, Bush era, Clinton era, going all the way back to George Washington era and before. So this is what we're dealing with. And I used to live in Chicago. The only reason that wasn't me is because their bullets don't shoot far enough to reach Ghana, right? So again, we see these images of the young men and women, some young, some also old, 92 years old here, kicked in her door, 7 years old here, Ayanna Stanley Jones. So you have Black Lives Matter, you have say her name. So we try to let us say their names, Mike Brown, Amadou Diallo, Oscar Grant, and so forth and so on. So it's not only a black male problem, it's black males and females, and it's always been black males and females. We are in this together. So here, what we see on this slide, prisoners of war in the war zone called America, also known as the United States. Some of us prefer to say United Snakes. So this is stop and frisk here on the top left. This is Philando Castile being shot. A very respectable member of the public. Here you have Eric Garner, but this was a thing that respectability politics didn't work. So you have your permits, you have everything, you took your training, they don't care, right? This is the modern day chain gang. This is Mike Brown shot and left for hours on the concrete. This is Flint, Michigan. This is the water that's coming out of the fire hydrants. And this is, lead poisoned water, has so many other poisons inside of it. And this is what the Africans were forced to drink there in Flint, Michigan. And so many have lasting problems that will last with them until they die, and they may even die early. Now all of this is part and parcel of the criminalization of the race. And there's a quote by Ambassador O, from those who don't know, he's part of United Front, a group. And he says, treated like a thief on stolen land, a descendant of stolen woman and stolen man. This is profound. Treated like a thief on stolen land, a descendant of stolen woman and stolen man. So they criminalize us, but the land that they are doing it on, they stole. The people who they are criminalizing are those who they kidnapped and stole from Africa. So it brings up the question of how can they legitimately say anything about what's criminal and what's not, because what they do is illegitimate. Now when we look at all these things that they are doing against African people, you can look at the goals of COINTELPRO from declassified documents, and this is highlighted. They say they wanted to prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. And this is just what they did. So when you see them doing this to all and any black males and females, it's because they realize that any and all of us could be the black messiah, which is part of why we want to divest from America. Divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
Divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
Blacktastic. So again, these are assassinations. Every African equals black prisoner of war executed should be regarded as an assassination. So they say the charge is murder, but again, they realize that any and all of us are that black messiah, at least potentially. So Malcolm X wasn't always on this level. At one point in time, he was doing other things. And then also you see the movement to make America deplorable again. And these are the deplorables that you see here, led by Trump and so many others. So Donald Trump has been elected and appointed members of the alt-right movement and other white supremacists and white nationalists to key positions in his cabinet. Now this isn't a new thing, and for those who may not be aware, Amos Wilson warned us of this in the 80s, where you have black mayors of Atlanta, DC, and so forth and so on. He said this is just like Reconstruction. So the 1870s, you had PBS Pinchback, you had Hiram R. Revels, you had African senators, governors, and so forth and so on. But as soon as the Hayes-Tilden Compromise came through, this is where you saw a massive lynching campaign, bloodletting on a scale that is hard to even imagine in this day and time. So we could anticipate, for those who understand history, the same thing. So here you have a symbol, Barack Obama. As soon as that era is coming to a close, all they need is a symbolism in order to justify what they do. So now you have Africans continually being lynched in the streets. So I've mentioned divestment. So we're saying divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
Divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
Divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
Blacktastic. So one way that this could be done is by knowledge production and its associated cottage industries such as publishing, conferences, employment, and so forth and so on. Right? Now, let's look at some of the cold hard numbers. The publishing industry in the US is worth $27.98 billion. That's with a B, and that's in 2014. 2.7 billion units, right? That's according to the Association of American Publishers. You can look at the link below in order to look at some of where that information is coming from. And you see Elsevier and others, beating up academics saying, I know you have more money than that. Then you can look at the meetings and events industry. Conferences, academic conferences are part of this. That this creates 6.3 million jobs and generates almost 1 trillion a year in direct, indirect, and induced spending. So the industry's direct 106 billion contribution to GDP is greater than auto manufacturing. So think about your Ford, your GM, and all of that. It doesn't reach up to just meeting and talking about things. Sports, so think about NBA, NFL, all of that, boxing, everything put together, that's 71 billion. Processing services, 76 billion. And if you include other things, including indirect and induced spending, it goes up to $458 billion. This is before, just on an individual level, we talk about those who will buy new clothes, get new luggage to front for people, get equipment for these conferences. So all of this is in there. So the economic impact, again, 1.8 million meetings occur in the US each year, 280 billion in spending, so you can break it down and so forth and so on. But all of that, the point is just to say it's a lot of money. So we're saying divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
Divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
Divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
Blacktastic. Again, some of the same point, 2012 statistics, 398 billion contributed to GDP, 103 billion business travel in the US. So again, all these are cottage industries. We think about knowledge production, but there are things on the side. Who are you going to fly with? Where are you going to stay? What hotel are you going to stay in? What food are you going to eat? Your per diem expenses, all of that is going in there. So basically, it comes to sometimes, we'll have African conferences, but the content is just a prop to, run money launder for the US, get it from our pockets right back into the US government. So the meeting industry is far-reaching. Travel and hospitality, convention and visitor bureaus, corporate meeting planning, event venues, equipment providers, content speakers, all of that is money. Now we can also look at post-secondary institution revenue, 497 billion in total revenues. So this is, especially for African people, this is us financing our enemies. So we say we don't like seeing Laquan McDonald getting shot down, but as long as we're there and perpetuating this, we are the ones who are buying the bullets for them. we're the ones who are buying the police cars for them because we keep investing in it. Where's our money from the mortgage going? Where's our tax money going? All of that is going to build the prisons that they're housing us in. So when we're saying we're divesting, we're actually saying let's remove the props that are keeping America standing, because they can't do it without our participation to some degree or another. 144 billion in federal grants and loans, 3.7 million workers, 2.7% of the labor force. So there's big money in this. So as we say, academia and its cottage industries, it creates many cottage industries and the wealth that surrounds them. So as such, it will be a viable option to cease and desist from traveling to and attending conferences and participating in other aspects of knowledge production in the U.S. as part of an academic divestment movement in solidarity, right? So we're saying divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
Divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
Divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
That's what we're talking about. So we're saying divest now. We're now in a time where African equals black people throughout the world will be served from divesting from the United States. So we see the Black Power fist, but when we have that fist with money in it and removing it from there, I said that anytime you repatriate to Africa, you're robbing the bank, the World Bank, the IMF. You're taking money out of your enemies' mouths and instead putting it here. So you can do that without a gun. So we're saying, again, divest from the United States and invest in Africa. And this is what you're seeing. For those who are wondering why the map is right side up, since we are at African Studies Association of Africa, African Studies Association, I would say turn to the cartographer, the nearest cartographer, and ask them what the very first map in the history of the planet was. And they will tell you perhaps the Turin Papyrus map, which was invented right here in Africa, and it was a south up map, right? So these are things that we don't even think about, but this is Africa right side up. Very good. So what we see right now is a black hole is going to fill this white pool, or we can say white cesspool as it may be. And sometimes it's not a small hose, sometimes it's a fire hose that's going into this. So we keep investing, we keep pulling all of our funds and resources and throwing it into this white cesspool. Sometimes we say the solution is recycling black dollars, but as long as it's in the same white container, it's like, let's pull it out from the pool, let's run it through, get the whole black holes wet, and then run it right back into the white pool. So there are tiers to this. It's not saying that that's not something that's useful, but there are tiers of divestment. And you can see, I'm going to get in where I fit in. I'm no longer at least going to publish in the U.S. Other people may say, I'm going to remove myself and my family from the U.S. So again, whatever you're able to do, you can just say, all right, I'm going to go to the black Marriott in D.C. instead of the white-owned Marriott, right? These are things that we can do. And there is a black Marriott in D.C. But what we're talking about overall is draining the white cesspool in order to divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
Divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
Divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
So we're talking about draining this white cesspool. So now when Trump wants to belly flop, we tell him dive right on in because there's no longer any water in this white cesspool. So now he will feel the effects of his belly flop. And what we're also talking about is making Africa great again, right? Now, unlike Make America Great Again, America has never been great. How many people are aware of this? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we have 6 people here who know that. Very good. We'll try to get that number up. America has always been a cesspool of hypocrisy, contradictions, and lies. All men are created equal. Meanwhile, you are enslaving African people in your backyard. So according to Malcolm X, again, democracy is hypocrisy. Until they can show us otherwise, we'll continue to say so. However, Africa actually was great in the past and can be great again. So for me, I decided to stay put. So financing one's enemy as little as possible. In my own case, I decided let me not participate in conferences in the United States. So by doing so, not only is the racist, white supremacist system of America deprived of the lion's share of funds from travel, accommodation, per diem, Africa is enriched by me staying put where I am. And we can just look at an example. One of my colleagues on a BB2 Mikasa provided.
Obadele, you've got 2 minutes.
Okay, no
2
problem.
minutes.
All right, all right. So
Because we need other speakers to come in.
no problem. I'll make it quick. So we're looking at in Accra, 100 million in annual profit, 24 million. We can look at GDP, 1.2 billion for Ghana's tourism. So as such, I will call on other individuals and the African Studies Association to consider a similar move to divest from America. And recently, Wale Soyinka did just that. So he tore up his US green card over the Trump victory. University of California is saying they want to divest from America, 13.2 billion there. And they should also consider divesting from the stolen land which they occupy. Now, UC says they can only do that for foreign governments that are guilty of genocide, but the US, according to the UN definition, is guilty of genocide, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions to bring about its physical destruction, check, imposing measures to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And this was uncovered back in 1951 We Charge Genocide report by William Patterson. So there's no lack of irony that ASAA conferences in particular tend to be in America rather than Africa, but we should put our money where our mouths are. So if you look at 2015, San Diego, 2014, Indianapolis, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and we can continue down, DC, San Francisco, and all white hotels. There are also black hotels, so we could at least do that. San Francisco, DC, Boston, New Orleans. And this one, again, at the white Marriott in DC. So 2,000 scholars. And we say, imagine Africa at the center. Can we actually imagine Africa at the center of our planning of locations? Let's just make the conference here in Africa, right? So according to Lorentzian physics, two MCs can't occupy the same space at the same time. It's against the laws of physics. By the same token, you can't have a conference in America and then also have the same conference here in Africa. Let's look at that. Then you look at ASA membership. For those who remember, this is Scrooge McDuck swimming in money. That 2,000 members across $180 per member or $230 per member is a lot. So we asked, how does Africa benefit from this? It's like trickle-down economics. We told them the wealth would trickle down, but it doesn't. It stays right there in America, just like aid, which it comes from Africa ultimately, but when it comes back, we end up feeding everyone in the world except for ourselves. For those who are interested,
Okay, you need to be wrapping up.
Yeah,
you need to be wrapping up so Angola can come in.
I have 2 more slides. So the resolutionaries by Aikwe Alma goes into the ridiculousness of some of these
half a minute, because Angola needs to come in.
No problem.
And we need to exit this room by 10:15.
No problem. So look at the resolutionaries for this whole conference phenomenon. Last year, African Studies Association of Africa was there in Ibadan. And according to Saleh Mbanefo, that contributed to 1.1 billion in 2015. And next year we'll be in Ethiopia. So instead of just imagining Africa at the center, we're looking at actualizing Africa at the center. And we invite Africans to come to ASAA 2017. So thank you very much. Betum amsekenalo medama senyei wala dama kwekaka jerengenje eshe asantini sana matondo mingi fofo. Thank you. Divest from America.
Divest in Africa.
Divest from America.
Divest in Africa.
Divest from America.
Divest in Africa.
You have a question here?
Yeah.
Yes.
You were saying that apartheid is a symptom, and specifically it's a symptom of.
So I would say that the root cause is what are known as white people, those who identify as white. And apartheid was one of many tools that they've used. So they've used apartheid, they've used capitalism, they've used Christianity, they've used neoliberalism, they've used so many other things, but they themselves have been the problem for African people for at least the last 3,000 plus years. So again, they want to say, oh, well, let's keep you focused on the capitalism. And I think we mentioned before, Dr. Bobby Wright talks about the psychopathic racial personality, where we keep chasing after the cape instead of the matador, and that's just yet another case of it. So we wonder, after we've gotten rid of apartheid, why are we still having problems? Because we keep misidentifying a symptom as the problem.
Okay. And then when you break down the word apartheid, you can break it down to apart the id, as in the id, ego, and the superego. And so in your estimation, is that intentional? That they were looking at, you said something about apart, keeping us apart from the id, if you will. Can you elaborate on that?
No, it's not an English word to my understanding, it's Dutch. So whatever, I don't speak Dutch. So I think that would be putting an English interpretation and superimposing it on the Dutch language. I'm pretty sure apart would be the same. They're all Germanic languages, but in terms of what the hate, you know, and they say apartheid, whatever that part is, I really don't understand Dutch to be able to tell you. Any other questions from our side or online, as we're trying to reconnect to those who are in DC?
Obadele, do you want to come in about Make Africa Great Again? Did you hear the questions?
No, I didn't hear the question.
Okay, so there was one comment that using the phrase "Make Africa Great Again" gives Donald Trump and his administration mileage. The presenter of the question has had to leave, so I hope that I'm representing her adequately. So she had a plea to you personally to not use "Make Africa Great Again" because it privileges Donald Trump's rhetoric. And there was another question also about a particular participant here not being sure how great Africa was because I guess coming from Cameroon and looking at what goes on in Cameroon, she's wondering how great it was. So we started a slight conversation about where we would measure where Africa has been and where we are today, and issues of antiquity and where African peoples have come from. So if you can comment on that very briefly, maybe 2 minutes, and then we really need to wrap this session up.
Okay, no problem, that's easy. One of the issues is our miseducation, diseducation, and anti-education. I think our sister in Cameroon may not know that the very first book written in the history of the world was written in Africa. She may not know that the first physician in the world was right here in Africa. The first female outright ruler was here in Africa. So I can give the names, Patahotep, we can mention the world's first multi-genius. So the reason why she doesn't know how great Africa was is intentional. She's not supposed to know. And that is, her thinking about it is a result of her intentional lack of knowledge. And it's not lack of knowledge because she didn't want to know. It's because her curriculum is given to her by her Eurasian enemies. So that's one. In terms of using the term "Make Africa Great Again," part of it is, of course, a play, on what's out there. And also, to put it in perspective, whereas Africa was actually great in the past, America has never been great, and most likely, by the looks of it, never will be great. So, I can understand, but, the person or whoever this was can also understand that it's intentional, because I want to juxtapose those two. America was never great, it's not great now, and it doesn't look to be great in the near future. Africa actually was great, so by using that term, we're saying, now you have to actually, like the sister from Angola, she's like, she's not sure how great Africa was. I'm basically sending her back so that she can actually find out and learn how great Africa was. Everyone is subjected to miseducation, diseducation, and anti-education. By telling her that now, she will have to at least ask the question and find out how great Africa was, and find out that that was actually appropriate in the African context. It's never appropriate in the American context.
Thank you very much. I mean, on a personal note, I'd also have to say, find your own catchphrase, because it's sort of, me, it privileges Donald Trump's language, but we can have that conversation. On that note, I'd like to thank everyone for being here. Thank our participants from Angola and from Ghana. Thank you very much. Thank our technicians who've been amazing, struggling with the challenges of the internet and communication across 3 different countries, and just enjoy the rest of the day. I guess technicians, you let them know how the other session is going to be streamed, because it's in a different room, right? They are streaming in another session to them. Okay, all right. Guys, thank you very, very much, and thank you to everyone.
Okay. And because Donald Trump stole my African ancestors, I'm stealing his phrase. Give me that.
I'll take it.
All right, so we had a question here. Can we continue the conversation? I think so. So you had, was it on the Oxford thing, or you had something?
No, it was on the.
Yeah, let's continue, so in case they want to have any questions for either me or Evelyn, I guess. Okay, go ahead.
I'm interested in strategy as we're trying to move ourselves forward and expand. And particularly when it comes to strategy, when they were taking some exception predictably to invest in Africa, you weren't saying Africa dominate the world, you weren't saying Africa should destroy the world, you're saying invest in Africa. Invest is a pretty safe word, it's a pretty benign word, and people were taking exception to that. And I find it interesting because people don't seem to take exception to the same type of patriotism, if you will, if I can borrow that word, when it's being shown for China or India or something like that. And similarly, people don't question how professional the attire of the Arab sheiks are when they're at the world table discussing whatever matters. Nobody talks about the thing on their head that they have and the clothes that they're wearing and how come they're not wearing a suit and tie and how unprofessional or uncorporate that is. It's very selective when coming to Africa. So I say those things to say that when it comes to strategy, one of the things that I'm interested in, I'm interested in your thoughts about strategizing by using words like planet caretakers, original planet caretakers, and we want to get back to the position of being planet care people, which takes our responsibility to a global level rather than a continental level. And it says the same thing in different words, but might even have a little bit more historical accuracy to it. What's your thought on that ploy, if you will, on words?
Okay. There's one thing that, I think that anything could possibly, work. There are positives, negatives, and anything that we look at. I think one thing that Kwame Ture used to say is that people would say, oh, are you still fighting for African people? We should be fighting for everybody, And he was like, African people are in the worst situation. So if you are caring for or fighting for those who are in the most degraded state, then any movement that they move up would be a movement for everybody else. In another talk that I gave a metaphor, with Eric Garner, I can't breathe, is what he kept saying. And I gave the analogy of when you're on the airplane, right, and they say put the mask on yourself before you put on everybody else. I think that there could possibly be benefits to that, but there's also a possibility of watering it down, because then we say, oh, well, let's go to Switzerland and take care of the planet there. All right, let's go to America or wherever, and you end up disenfranchising the people who you meant to target, but because you were very loose with the language, now that can be interpreted in any type of way. And it's like when they said affirmative action for quote unquote minorities, they didn't say for black people, they said for minorities. So now when I went to Morehouse College, which was a HBCU, there was a white guy there on a scholarship for minorities because he's a minority in the country. So, just to make sure that it doesn't end up being, oh, well, white folks with red hair and freckles, take the thing. You may want to be very specific with the language that you're talking about. And I think that we could benefit by focusing on Africa because, again, we're the ones who can't breathe. But meanwhile, we're trying to put the mask on the stewardess, the pilot, and everybody else who's breathing just fine in their cabin. Yeah. So as we close out, any thoughts about this? You look like you are in pain.
So about your phrase about making Africa great again.
Yeah.
So going back then, you necessarily is saying that Africa was great at a point in time. So during the time that was great, and you look at our political system was basically kinship. Do you think in view that we can go back to kinship and always
to kingship?
Yeah. Like ancient Egyptian, as an example, during their second phase, they were faced like the local government.
This is a very good question, and it came up recently. Ike Oyama was here, the writer, and this actually came out in the Middle Nature Study Group last week. He had this basically saying royalty was the problem itself. So as soon as you have someone who is a king or a royal, this means now you have to have a hierarchy, and saying that is the seed of the chaos that will later come back and develop it. And anytime, this is one thing I tell my students, that anytime we're looking at whatever the topic is, I say, go to the primary sources, read what the Meta says, what are the proverbs, what are the idioms. And basically, when I look at the prophecies of Nefertiti, this is a document from that time. It talks about Amenemhat the first, who's referred to as Ameni in the document. And it says that, the Asiatics have come and, everything is jacked up. But what Ameni is coming to do is to drive them out. And by driving them out, which they are the manifestation of chaos, then Ma'at will be restored. If you look at the instructions to Mary Carre, it talks about how miserable these Asiatics are. If you look at the Lamentations of Ipuwer, it talks about the Asiatics, coming into the land as again the coming of destruction and chaos. And basically, when I look at what the ruler's responsibility was for in the original text that we're reading, this is the guarantor of Ma'at by keeping these Eurasians out of Africa. So I think not so much in terms of the letter of the law and saying let's do everything exactly, what's the spirit of it. So whatever the system is, let's see how we can keep our enemies out of Africa, whether it be from the copper mines in Zambia, whether it be the Chinese galamsey here in Ghana, whatever the case, whether it be blood diamonds in Sierra Leone and Liberia, whatever it is. I think that if we can return to that core sensible notion of Africa for the Africans, race first, those types of things, then I think we'll be in a much better position. But again, I didn't find in the primary text what he was talking about, and I would have liked for him to have pointed out, oh, in this text it says that this, or this is just his own interpretation of it. But again, anytime you find the ruler in Sanhat, which is a book that he translated, it talks about these are the walls of the rulers that were built to trample the Asiatics and to smite the sandfarers. These are the Arabs. So it's saying we built all these walls to keep chaos out of there, and these are the walls of the ruler. You understand? So the ruler's whole job is to keep chaos from coming in. But again, this is Chancellor Williams' thesis that as soon as they come into African civilization, that's the beginning of the destruction of their civilization. We can see that with the Hyksos, who established a base in the Nile, Delta, and then they use that as a launching pad to take over, a large percentage of the nation. And it wasn't until Amos was able to drive them out once again that chaos was driven out and Ma'at was restored. So again, I see the ruler's role in all these texts after text after text is preserving Ma'at by keeping the enemies of Africa out.
I think our divine pharaohs have to come back.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll see how we can make it happen. If they're about, preserving Ma'at and keeping out chaos, I would be all for it.
I was reminded watching this of something that I had forgotten about and had pleasantly forgotten about, and that is what it was like to go to some of these types of conferences where people are talking and they're talking around the issue and they're skirting around the issue and they're being all things proper and poised, and afterwards they're going to all sit down to lobster and drawn butter and caviar and champagne together and say, and all these types of things. And
Divest.
and I remember my frustration in those moments, and one of my frustrations have to do with the fact that I'm hopelessly pragmatic, but also, what's the relevance of all of this? You're spending all of this time and all of this money, and you have our attention and our time for this chunk, this 4 hours or whatever, and all that you're saying and all that you're writing means what? It does what? Is this a career move? Are you strengthening your resume? Did your publicist have you do this because it's going to help with your book tour? I mean, what is all of this? You're talking about the trial, we're not talking about the trial, we are talking about the trial, we're not talking about the trial. I'm confused.
How does it benefit Africa? That's our trickle-down theory. That having these conferences in the U.S. in white-owned hotels discussing the problems of Africa. There's a book called Lords of Poverty that I've mentioned, in another context, where basically it goes into how the whole aid industry is designed to keep poverty and all these other problems, that if it actually solved the problem, then you don't get your 4x4s, you don't get your business class tickets to Congo to go have Texas steak night, and then you go out for a photo op and then you come back. That this whole aid industry is just that. It's a business, it's an industry where you find, and as I was sitting here, you think about, you hear the term spiritual vampires, it makes you think about intellectual vampires. It makes you think about, chichi flies. It makes you think about mosquitoes that, living off of, and it's like, I was sitting there, I was laughing at one point, I was like, is this a hobby? What is
Right.
It's like some people collecting baseball cards, let's discuss Africa.
Yeah.
And this, it becomes an excuse to enrich America. That was the whole point of my presentation. So he asked about neocolonialism. If you could get anything but a straight answer.
Right, right. And that was another reason why I didn't ask the question, because I thought, I'm just screamed if they do with my question what they did with Moses' question, just speak to the damn question.
Mm-hmm.
And so this brought back a memory, and I just thought, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember going there, and I remember having moments in those kinds of settings where I would be like the detractor. I remember at one psychological conference we were at, we were having a round table discussion about homophobia, and I just went off. And I said, I'm sick to death of you all bullying us with this term, homophobia. A phobia is an unnatural and unusual fear of something. We're not talking about people being unnaturally and unusually afraid of homosexuals like people are afraid of tarantulas. We're talking about, for the most part, people having disgust or contempt, or on the low end, disinterest in homosexuality. And you all are slathering them with this term of homophobia and dinging them professionally and otherwise, and I'm sick of it, and it's bullying. And so as I spoke out, people were like, oh, and then a few other people kind of started venturing out, and to my shock, the facilitator said, I'm so glad you said that, I've been feeling the same way. And I'm like, no, you haven't, you're the one that's facilitating this. This is an option.
You're enabling.
Yeah.
So
as I sat there, I thought, I wouldn't want these guys to be writing and talking about me posthumously and what Carnita was like, and the guy on the end, I don't even know what he was saying. I speak English, he speaks English. I have the slightest idea what he was saying. The slightest idea. I recognize the words like the, and, the. I don't know what he was saying. Mental masturbation, I guess. But I just thought to myself, I would scream if my life was left to people like this to write. Because it would just go nowhere fast, and it would just be so much crazy making, and making big issues over minutia, So, but it did bring me back to one of the morning lectures when the panelist was talking about archiving our records and keeping our records and the different ways to keep records and keeping film versus keeping the data that's written on paper and all these kinds of things. And I thought to myself, we probably do need to step up our game a little bit and always build in a record keeping aspect of the things that we do. So whether it's a video archive or audio archive or pamphlet or all of the above or something, it probably would be to our advantage to just make sure that that's just a given moving forward, so that we can have a record of this stuff, so that then if something like this, God forbid, should ever happen to us, at least when people go back to look at the original source, they can look at the original source and say, no, I don't think that's what bro was about.
Yeah, it was interesting when Ike Alma came here. I asked him would he be willing to speak on African studies. He said no. He said it would be a waste of time because anything that he would say, the people here would not be interested in hearing. And at the end of the day, they would just get pissed off, and it wouldn't do very much. So it was even pulling teeth to get him to come and sit in on the Medunetra class. It was just like, okay, there's a space of sanity somewhere in this, but it makes you at least for me, makes me reflect on myself. Like, to what degree am I going to be, or am I a vampire? You know, let's sit here and discuss Africa's problems, and let's just get fat off of that, you know. And, you know, it's disgusting and repulsive. So, you know, I think more than even pointing fingers at what goes on there is a check, a self-check of, all right, are we going to be the same folks? Let's write a grant, you know. And matter of fact, as I was sitting here, a colleague sent something out about something that's going to be funded by Mellon and blah, 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 and this, that, and the third. It's coming out of the Netherlands, and, you know, and you can see, you know, the parallels. So people are getting fat. None of Africa's problems are being solved. But then you look at it and it's like, that's not even the point. The point is, all right, we need a topic to enrich America. Let's make Africa this meeting. Let's invite 2,000 folks to this one, you know. So yeah, it's a problem. But, you know, we need to look at ourselves and be like, or me, I need to look at myself and be like, to what degree am I doing the same thing? And do I want to do this? And how can I come up with something different? How can I be different from that?
Well, I think one positive that came out of it for me was, I had heard about Mau Mau's in the past, and Mau Mau this, Mau Mau that, and kind of little whips of it here and there. So a positive that came out of it for me is, I'm just going to make a concerted effort now to just kind of dive into it so that I can see some of the revolutionary thrust in that, and see how much of that I can borrow and take into my own space, how much of that I can use as leverage, whose shoulders I can stand on in that regard, who I can learn from moving forward personally and interpersonally. And so that was one positive that came out of it, but the folks themselves, like, wow. So that's my thoughts.
Any other reflections, thoughts? Was your question answered? Yeah, and this is the thing, you know, like to some degree it would be like, oh, it would be progressive if they actually said neo-colonialism or whatever, but then by the same token, exactly where they are, right? So imagine they're saying neo-colonialism, but then everything, that all their content is this type of stuff. So, you know, to a certain degree, it's like, all right, just say what you say, and that lets me know where you are, that lets me know what you're dealing with. Because if everybody's up here talking about post-colonial, it speaks volumes. It speaks volumes.
Clarify for me, I've heard you say it once before, but I don't remember what you said. The offensiveness in the term sub-Saharan Africa.
I don't know if I've dealt with that one per se, but the issue would be that, or for me, my issue with this partition of Africa is that literally the enemies of African people have stolen North Africa, right? So it's not so much in terms of like that terminology that I know that I've spoken to in any context, but for me, when you look at the meaning of Kemet, it means land of black people. So to whatever degree, however many kilometers or miles or hectares or acres have been stolen by non-Africans, which is non-black people, that's the same degree to which that land has to be reclaimed. So we talk about ancient Kemet. I think we also need to start talking about modern Kemet in terms of anywhere African black people hold sway, you know, live, whatever, that should be seen as an extension of this modern Kemet, the land of black people. So whether it be in the Eastern Hemisphere, Pacific Islands, Western Hemisphere, that it's about reclaiming the land of black people. So I would see this as a super, not even nation, it's beyond the concept of a nation, but like mutual defense, you know, common economics. So beyond the continentalists, which is really just radical integrationist type of deal, where we're so-called against imperialism, but we're down for our first imperialists. The first ones who came in here, stole our land, raped our women, blah, blah, blah. Oh, that's cool, you've been here a minute, so it's cool. Dutch Boers, you've been here a minute, all right, it's cool. All right, British, whatever. You know, Chinese, all right, come. India, you two come. And it's insane to me. So I'm like, if you're against imperialism, you have to be also against our very first imperialists who are still on stolen land. And that was the point here. So, okay, use your own term. I'm like, the place you're standing right now, you are on stolen land. You are standing on land that was stolen. You are talking to someone who was stolen. You understand? So it's like, oh, don't take a phrase. It's like, really? So, you know, this is the whole issue. So these Arabs have stolen African land. So our future trajectory needs to be reclaiming, you know, that land, reclaiming all of the artifacts that they have stolen. I was just there, and as I was there walking through the museums and everything else, you know, it's like, all right, all of our science and technology and whatever else we're doing needs to be going towards how are we going to get our stuff back from, you know, it's like these humanities types of concerns. You look at Germany talking about Lebensraum. So all of their science and technology, Mercedes-Benz, everything else was for their humanities, which is we need to have living space, right? So they're trying to run into Russia and all these other places. So that led to their scientific boom. So for us, I'm like, all right, people act like science and technology and math and all that is a be all and end all. No, that's, you harness that and channel it towards what African people need. So our science and anything else we develop needs to be towards the goals of, you know, how do we reclaim our land? How do we protect modern Kemet, the modern land of black people, whether it's West Papua New Guinea, whether it's Mekamui, so-called Bougainville, whether it's, you know, Ghana, wherever it happens to be, that needs to be, you know, first on our agenda. African liberation trumps every other concept we can deal with. Yeah, so I hope, if nothing else, the call to action is divest from America.
Invest in Africa.
There you go, y'all paying attention. Yeah. Thanks for staying all this long. I know folks been coming, going.
So are the people on Skype, are they folks who typically tune into the